isn't for people like you. Move to the back where you belong.
The words sliced through the humid air of Chicago O'Hare International Airport like a blade through silk. Gate C-24 buzzed with the chaotic energy of 200 agitated passengers, their voices mixing with the rumble of thunder outside. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows with relentless fury, each drop exploding against the glass like tiny bombs. The storm had delayed flights for hours, turning the terminal into a pressure cooker of frustration and frayed nerves. Crying babies wailed from their strollers. Business travelers jabbed at their phones with increasing desperation. Teenagers sprawled across uncomfortable chairs, earbuds blasting music that leaked into the already noisy atmosphere. The air reeked of coffee, fast food, and the distinct smell of too many people packed into too small a space for too long. Flight 882 to Atlanta sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its white fuselage streaked with rain. North Star Airlines had promised departure at 3:47 p.m. It was now 4:15 p.m. and tempers were running hot. The man standing at the gate counter didn't look like he belonged in first class. At least that's what Jessica Martinez thought as she stared at his boarding pass with undisguised skepticism. His black t-shirt was plain, no designer label visible. His dark jeans had that worn-in look that spoke of years of use not expensive distressing. His leather sneakers showed scuff marks on the toes, and his simple black backpack looked like something a college student might carry. But what really caught Jessica's attention was his skin. Deep brown calm, composed. The kind of calm that comes from confidence, though she interpreted it differently. She saw someone who didn't belong in her premium cabin, someone who had somehow gotten hold of a boarding pass meant for better people. Before we dive deeper into this explosive story, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Are you Team Justice? Or have you ever experienced discrimination yourself? We want to hear from you because your voices matter in stories like this. If this opening already has your blood boiling, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. What starts as a routine boarding process is about to become the most viral moment in aviation history. Let's get started. The man standing calmly at Jessica's counter was Marcus Thompson, though she had no idea she was about to make the biggest mistake of her professional life. At 47, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built something from nothing and never forgot where he came from. His plain clothes weren't a fashion statement. They were a disguise. Marcus Thompson was worth $18 billion. He was the CEO and founder of North Star Airlines, the very company whose gate agent was currently questioning his right to exist in first class. For 3 weeks he had been flying undercover on his own airline, investigating a disturbing pattern of complaints flooding social media. Anonymous passengers posting stories of discrimination, profiling, and humiliation at North Star gates across the country. Marcus didn't believe in investigating problems from the comfort of his executive suite. He believed in seeing the truth with his own eyes, feeling it in his own chest. Today, that truth was staring back at him through Jessica's contemptuous gaze. He remembered being 22 years old, fresh out of business school, with his MBA still smelling like ink. He'd saved every penny to buy a first-class ticket to the most important job interview of his life. His suit was second-hand but clean, his shoes polished until they gleamed. The airline clerk had looked at him the same way Jessica was looking at him now. "Young man, this section isn't for people like you," she had said, loud enough for the entire gate to hear. She'd forced him to economy despite his valid ticket, and the humiliation had burned in his chest like acid. He'd missed the interview because of the delay, lost the opportunity, and spent that night in a cheap hotel room making a promise to himself. Never again. Not for him, not for anyone. That promise had driven him to build North Star Airlines from the ground up, starting with a single used plane, and a dream that everyone deserved dignity at 30,000 feet. Respect. Every traveler wasn't just North Star's slogan. It was Marcus's personal mission statement. Now, 25 years later, he was back in the same position. But this time, he owned the airline. Jessica Martinez had been with North Star for 8 years, long enough to develop strong opinions about who belonged where. At 34, she prided herself on maintaining standards on keeping the premium cabins exclusive for premium people. She'd grown up in suburban Ohio, where appearances mattered and judgments came quick. Her perfectly applied makeup, crisp navy uniform, and condescending smile were her armor against a world that she organized into categories: us and them, worthy and unworthy, first class and everyone else. She looked at Marcus's boarding pass again, noting the Seat 1 designation. First class, front row, the most expensive seat on the plane. Then she looked at him again, cataloging everything wrong with the picture. No Rolex watch. No designer briefcase, no tailored suit, no obvious signs of wealth or status. The scanner had beeped green when she'd first checked his pass, but Jessica had learned not to trust technology completely. Sometimes the system glitched. Sometimes people found ways to game it. And sometimes people like the man standing in front of her tried to access spaces they hadn't earned. "Sir, this can't be right," she said, tapping the boarding pass with one perfectly manicured nail. Her voice carried just enough authority to sound official, just enough doubt to plant suspicion in nearby passengers' minds. First-class passengers have a certain profile. Around them, heads began to turn. A businessman in an expensive suit glanced over from his phone call, eyebrows raised. A woman with a diamond-studded phone case lifted her device thumb, hovering over the camera app. Near the window, a teenager with pink hair was already live-streaming her phone, capturing the developing confrontation. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling from 25 years ago. But this time was different. This time he had power. This time he could do something about it. The boarding pass scanned green. He said quietly, his voice steady and calm, "That's my seat." Jessica's jaw tightened. She tapped her tablet, frowned, then tapped again. The system showed exactly what Marcus knew it would show: a valid first-class ticket purchased 3 weeks ago, fully paid, no flags, no problems. But the system didn't show what Jessica saw when she looked at him, someone who didn't fit her mental image of a premium passenger. "Our system sometimes glitches," she said, louder this time. Loud enough for the growing crowd of onlookers to hear every word. "Let me verify your identity. We've had issues with fraudulent bookings lately." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Fraud. The word carried weight, implied criminality, suggested that Marcus had somehow cheated his way into a seat he didn't deserve. Whispers rippled through the crowd as passengers strained to hear more. Marcus felt the eyes on him, the silent judgment of strangers who knew nothing about him except what they could see. But he also felt something else. The quiet strength that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of. He had built an empire by refusing to be diminished, by turning humiliation into motivation. "I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago," he said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that comes from absolute certainty. "I have every right to board this aircraft." Jessica's face flushed red, but not with embarrassment, with frustration. The passenger wasn't backing down, wasn't accepting her authority, wasn't playing by rules she thought everyone understood. She gestured toward his clothes, his appearance, everything about him that didn't match her expectations. "Sir, we reserve the right to verify passenger credentials when appearance and ticket class seem inconsistent." The word inconsistent hit the crowd like a lightning strike. Phones came out instantly. 5, 10, 20 cameras pointed toward the counter as passengers realized they were witnessing something bigger than a simple boarding delay. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, here we go." Another voice muttered, "This is about to get ugly." Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture wildly or demand to speak to managers. He simply stood there holding his boarding pass while Jessica's face grew redder and her voice grew sharper. because somewhere deep in his core, he understood something that would change everything in the next 20 minutes. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's letting people reveal exactly who they are when they think no one important is watching. And Marcus Thompson, CEO of North Star Airlines, was about to teach everyone at Gate C-24 that you never know who's watching. The call button on Jessica's counter chimed softly as she pressed it with more force than necessary. Her supervisor would handle this. Carlos Rivera had been head of gate operations for 6 years, and he understood how things worked. He understood that maintaining standards meant making hard decisions, even when those decisions made some people uncomfortable. Carlos to Gate C. 24, she announced into her headset, then looked back at Marcus with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Sir, I've called my supervisor. He'll be able to sort this out properly." Marcus nodded once, a slight movement that somehow conveyed both patience and inevitability. He'd been in boardrooms with Fortune 500 executives who had less presence than this man in faded jeans, but Jessica couldn't see past his clothes to recognize the quiet power radiating from him. The crowd at Gate C-24 was growing restless. Flight delays always created tension, but now they had entertainment. Smartphones emerged from pockets and purses like flowers blooming in fast forward. The teenager with pink hair adjusted her live stream angle, whispering commentary to her growing audience. "Y'all, something crazy is happening at this gate right now. This airline is about to discriminate against this man in real time." 25 years ago, Marcus Thompson had sat in a cheap hotel room in Atlanta, his second-hand suit hanging in a plastic wrapped from the cleaners his dreams crushed by 8 words. "This section isn't for people like you." The humiliation had burned in his chest like swallowed fire, but it had also ignited something deeper, a determination that no one else would ever feel what he felt that night. He'd grown up in Detroit, the son of a factory worker and a nurse. His father worked double shifts building cars that he'd never be able to afford. His mother tended to patients in a hospital that charged fees she'd never be able to pay if she were the one lying in those beds. They'd taught him that dignity wasn't something you earned through wealth or status. It was something you carried inside yourself regardless of what others thought you deserved. The business plan for North Star Airlines had been born in that hotel room, scribbled on free notepaper, while Marcus wrestled with rage and disappointment. Respect. Every traveler wasn't just a marketing slogan he'd dreamed up years later. It was a promise he'd made to his 22-year-old self, a vow that he'd build something better than what he'd experienced. Starting with nothing but student loans and stubborn refusal to accept the status quo, Marcus had spent 5 years working 18-hour days, learning every aspect of aviation from fuel contracts to federal regulations. He'd cleaned planes, loaded baggage, and sold tickets while studying for his pilot's license. When he finally bought his first aircraft, a used Boeing 737 with more miles on it than most people's cars, he'd personally painted North Star on the fuselage. 20 years later, North Star Airlines operated 300 planes across 150 cities. Marcus's net worth had crossed the $18 billion mark, but he still remembered the weight of that first boarding pass in his trembling hand, the shame of being forced to the back of the plane despite having paid for a front seat. That memory was why he'd spent the last 3 weeks flying incognito on his own airline. Anonymous social media posts had been piling up for months. Passengers sharing stories of discrimination, profiling, and humiliation at North Star gates. Stories that sounded exactly like his own from 25 years ago. Marcus had ordered comprehensive investigations, but corporate reports always seemed to minimize problems to find explanations that absolved everyone of responsibility. He needed to see the truth himself. He needed to feel it in his own chest. Now he was feeling it. The suspicious stares, the whispered conversations, the assumption that his appearance determined his worth. 25 years after building an airline specifically to prevent these moments, they were still happening. On his airline. To him. Carlos Rivera arrived at Gate C-24 with the confident stride of a man who had handled difficult passengers before. At 39, he'd worked his way up from baggage handler to gate operations supervisor, and he understood that sometimes customer service meant saying no to customers who didn't understand boundaries. Jessica met him halfway, speaking in urgent whispers that she thought Marcus couldn't hear. "This passenger is attempting to board first class, but he doesn't match the profile. I think the boarding pass might be stolen or fraudulent." Carlos glanced toward Marcus, taking in the casual clothes, the lack of obvious wealth markers, the calm expression that somehow irritated him. He'd seen this before. People who found ways to access premium services they couldn't really afford, then acted entitled when questioned about it. "Let me handle this," Carlos told Jessica, then approached Marcus with the practiced smile of professional customer service. "Sir, I understand there's some confusion about your seat assignment. May I see your boarding pass and identification?" Marcus handed over both items without comment. Carlos examined them carefully, noting the discrepancy between the first-class designation and the passenger's appearance. The ID looked legitimate. The boarding pass had scanned green, but sometimes the system made mistakes. Mr. Thompson Carlos read from the ID. "This boarding pass shows Seat 1A, which is our premium first-class seat. That's a $3,400 ticket. Are you certain this is your correct reservation?" The question hung in the air like an accusation wrapped in politeness. Carlos wasn't asking if the boarding pass was legitimate. He was asking if Marcus really belonged in a seat that expensive. "I purchased that ticket 3 weeks ago," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the same calm certainty that had unsettled Jessica. "I have confirmation emails on my phone if you'd like to see them." Carlos hesitated. The passenger wasn't acting defensive or nervous, wasn't showing the typical signs of someone caught in deception. But appearances mattered in customer service, and sometimes you had to trust your instincts over technology. "Sir, we've been having issues with credit card fraud lately. High-end tickets purchased with stolen information. I'm going to need to verify this purchase with our fraud department before we can allow boarding." The words fraud department rippled through the growing crowd like electricity. Passengers pushed closer, phones recording every word. The teenager's live stream now showed 1,000 viewers, with comments flooding in faster than she could read them. "That's racial profiling," someone typed. "Sue them," wrote another. "This is disgusting," filled the comment stream. Sarah Kim, a 28-year-old travel blogger from Los Angeles, had been documenting her delayed flight for her followers when the confrontation began. Now she found herself live streaming what looked like a textbook case of discrimination in real time. Her phone captured Marcus's dignified composure and the staff's increasingly desperate justifications. "This is Sarah Kim coming to you live from Chicago O'Hare," she whispered to her phone. "We're witnessing something incredible here. This gentleman has a valid first-class boarding pass, but the airline is questioning him because of how he's dressed. This is 24 people. This shouldn't be happening." Mike Johnson, a 45-year-old businessman from Denver, lowered his own phone and stepped closer to the counter. He'd been flying first class for 15 years, had never once been asked to verify his ticket, despite looking significantly less put together than Marcus on many occasions. The hypocrisy was glaring. "Excuse me," Mike said to Carlos, holding up his own boarding pass. "I'm also first class. Would you like to verify my ticket with your fraud department?" Carlos glanced at Mike's expensive suit, his Rolex watch, his leather briefcase. "Sir, that won't be necessary." "Why not?" Mike pressed. "My ticket cost the same amount. Shouldn't you verify all first-class passengers equally?" The question struck like a hammer blow. Other passengers began to murmur agreement. Why was one first-class passenger being questioned while others boarded freely? What was the real difference between them? Elena Rodriguez, a 32-year-old marketing executive traveling with her 6-year-old daughter, had been documenting their delayed flight on Instagram when the incident began. Now she found herself capturing something much more significant than travel frustrations. "Mija, use your phone to record this too," she whispered to her daughter. Sometimes grown-ups do bad things, and we need to have proof so other grown-ups can fix it. Tom Bradley, a 67-year-old retired teacher from Phoenix, had been flying for 40 years. He'd seen discrimination evolve from blatant to subtle, but he'd never seen it so obvious in such a public setting. His weathered hands shook slightly as he pulled out his phone to record. "This is wrong," he said to the woman sitting next to him. "This is just wrong." The crowd dynamic was shifting. What had started as curious observation was becoming passenger revolt. People were choosing sides, and Marcus's side was growing. Carlos felt the pressure mounting. He'd handled difficult passengers before, but never with this much scrutiny, never with this many cameras pointed at him. The passenger wasn't backing down, wasn't accepting the authority Carlos was used to wielding without question. Sir Carlos said, trying to maintain professional composure, "I'm going to need you to step aside while we resolve this. We have other passengers waiting to board." Marcus looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at the faces watching this confrontation unfold. He saw his 22-year-old self in their eyes, the humiliation and powerlessness he'd felt when no one had spoken up for him. But he also saw something different. He saw people who were angry on his behalf, who recognized injustice when they witnessed it. "I'll wait," he said quietly, "but I won't step aside. I have every right to board this aircraft." Carlos felt a flash of frustration. The passenger was being obstinate, refusing to accept a reasonable compromise. Why couldn't he just accept a different seat and avoid making a scene? "Sir, we reserve the right to deny boarding to passengers who create disruptions." "What disruption?" Marcus asked. "I'm standing quietly, holding my valid boarding pass, waiting to board a flight I've paid for." "What exactly am I disrupting?" The question hung in the air because Carlos couldn't answer it honestly. Marcus wasn't being loud, wasn't being rude, wasn't causing any actual disruption except to Carlos's assumptions about who belonged in first class. Jessica stepped forward, emboldened by her supervisor's presence. "Our policy allows gate agents to use discretion for passenger safety and comfort, and I'm using mine." Discretion based on what Marcus asked, his voice still calm, but now carrying an edge that made several passengers lean forward to hear better. Jessica gestured toward him without quite pointing, a dismissive wave that encompassed everything about his appearance. Based on maintaining standards appropriate for premium service. The coded language wasn't fooling anyone. The crowd knew exactly what standards meant, what appropriate implied. They'd just heard discrimination wrapped in corporate policy, racism disguised as customer service. Sarah Kim's live stream now showed 5,000 viewers. The comments were exploding with outrage. Gate discrimination began trending on Twitter. Local news stations were getting tagged in posts about the developing confrontation at O'Hare. Marcus felt the familiar burning in his chest, but this time it wasn't humiliation, it was recognition. He was watching his own story repeat itself, but now he had the power to change how it ended. "Ma'am," he said to Jessica, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that made everyone within earshot stop talking. "I want to make sure I understand your position. Please state clearly what standards I'm failing to meet." Jessica hesitated. Something in Marcus's tone warned her that she was walking into dangerous territory, but Carlos's presence gave her confidence. Her supervisor was backing her up, supporting her judgment. "First-class passengers present themselves appropriately," she said. "They understand that premium service requires premium presentation." It wasn't quite the racist statement that would go viral, but it was close enough to make the crowd bristle with anger. Marcus nodded once, filing away her words for later use. "And you've determined that I don't meet these standards based on what criteria?" The question was a trap, and Jessica was walking straight into it. Every word she spoke was being recorded by dozens of phones broadcast live to thousands of viewers, preserved for posterity and accountability. But Jessica Martinez, gate agent for North Star Airlines, was about to make the statement that would end her career and change aviation history forever. She just didn't know it yet. Jessica's next words would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms, analyzed by legal experts, and studied in corporate training seminars for years to come. But in that moment, standing at Gate C-24 with the weight of assumed authority behind her, she felt justified in saying exactly what she was thinking. Look, people like you should be grateful we let you fly at all. The words hit the gate area like a physical blow. Complete silence fell over the crowd of passengers, the kind of profound quiet that precedes earthquakes or explosions. Even the crying babies seemed to pause as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Sarah Kim's phone trembled in her hands. Her live stream viewers shot up to 15,000 in a matter of seconds as notifications pinged across social media platforms. Did she just say what I think she said? She whispered to her audience, her voice barely audible. Marcus Thompson stood perfectly still. 25 years of building a business empire of training himself to respond to challenges with strategic thinking rather than emotional reactions had prepared him for this moment. He felt the familiar fire in his chest, but now it burned cold and focused rather than hot and helpless. People like me, he repeated quietly, his voice carrying across the silent gate area with crystalline clarity. Please continue that thought. Carlos Rivera felt his stomach drop. He recognized the dangerous territory they'd just entered, the lawsuit-worthy language that Jessica had just used, but the situation had developed too quickly for him to intervene. A dozen phones were recording every word, and social media was exploding in real time. Jessica, emboldened by what she perceived as support from her supervisor and validation from the crowd's attention, doubled down on her statement. You know exactly what I mean. First class is for first-class people. You're not first-class people. The viral soundbite that would destroy her career had just been delivered with perfect clarity to an audience of thousands. Mike Johnson stepped forward from the crowd, his face flushed with anger. Ma'am, what you just said is exactly the kind of discrimination that gets companies sued into bankruptcy. Do you understand what you've done? Elena Rodriguez was frantically typing on her phone, tagging news outlets and civil rights organizations in her posts. This is happening right now at O'Hare Airport Gate C-24, she wrote. North Star Airlines employee just said first class isn't for people like this gentleman. This is 2024. Tom Bradley's weathered hands shook as he held up his phone. In 40 years of flying through the civil rights era and beyond, he'd never heard such blatant discrimination stated so clearly and confidently. Young lady, he called out to Jessica, you just ended your career. But Jessica felt invincible. She had her supervisor's implicit support company policy backing her judgment and the assumed authority of her uniform. She looked directly at Marcus and spoke the words that would be quoted in congressional hearings about discrimination in transportation. Our premium cabins are designed for premium passengers. If you don't like our standards, there are other airlines that might be more accommodating to your needs. The code words were gone now. The polite corporate language had evaporated. What remained was pure, undisguised discrimination broadcast live to a global audience that was growing by the minute. Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. The simple gesture somehow commanded everyone's attention, as if they sensed that something significant was about to happen. He tapped a single contact and held the device to his ear. "This is Marcus," he said, his voice calm and controlled, but carrying an authority that made several passengers lean forward to hear better. "I'm at Gate C-24. Activate Protocol 7. The words meant nothing to the crowd, but they clearly meant something significant to whoever was on the other end of the call. Marcus listened for a moment, nodded once, then lowered the phone and looked directly at Jessica Martinez. "Call security," he said quietly. "Call your regional manager. Call whoever you need to call. But understand this, in the next 10 minutes, everything is going to change." Jessica laughed. actually laughed a sound that carried across the silent gate area like breaking glass. "Who are you calling your lawyer? Your activist friends? This isn't a courtroom, sir. This is my gate, and I make the decisions here." Carlos Rivera was beginning to recognize that they had seriously underestimated the passenger they were confronting. Something in Marcus's demeanor had shifted, revealing a core of absolute certainty that Carlos had only seen in executives and politicians. But he'd committed too much to back down now, Sir Carlos said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and step away from the counter. You're becoming disruptive." "What exactly have I disrupted?" Marcus asked, his voice never rising above conversational level. "I've stood here calmly while your employees questioned my right to exist, accused me of fraud, and stated clearly that people like me don't belong in first class. I haven't raised my voice, haven't used profanity, haven't threatened anyone. So tell me, what am I disrupting besides your assumptions?" The question hung in the air because there was no good answer. Marcus wasn't being disruptive in any traditional sense. He was being inconveniently dignified, frustratingly composed, and dangerously articulate. Patricia Williams arrived at Gate C-24 like a general responding to battlefield reports. As regional manager for North Star Airlines Midwest operations, she'd handled passenger complaints, employee disputes, and media incidents before. But the text message from Carlos had been unusually urgent. "Need immediate assistance. Gate C-24. Passenger situation escalating rapidly. Multiple cameras." Patricia took in the scene quickly. A crowd of agitated passengers' phones recording from multiple angles, her gate staff looking defensive and cornered, and a single man standing calmly at the center of it all. She'd seen difficult passengers before, but this felt different. "I'm Patricia Williams, regional manager," she announced, approaching Marcus with the professional confidence of someone used to solving problems. "I understand there's been some confusion about your reservation." Marcus turned to face her, and Patricia felt something shift in the atmosphere. The man's presence was commanding without being aggressive, authoritative without being loud. Something about him suggested that this situation was more complex than a simple customer service dispute. "No confusion," Marcus said clearly. "Your employees have refused to honor my valid first-class boarding pass based solely on my appearance. They've accused me of fraud, questioned my right to fly in a premium cabin, and stated explicitly that people like me don't belong in first class." Patricia glanced at Jessica and Carlos, both of whom avoided eye contact. She'd worked in customer service long enough to recognize the defensive posture of employees who'd said something they shouldn't have said. "Sir, I'm certain there's been a misunderstanding. Our staff are trained professionals who follow company policy. Are they trained to tell passengers that people like them should be grateful to fly at all?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying clearly across the gate area. "Because that's exactly what your gate agent just said on camera to a crowd of witnesses." Patricia felt her stomach drop. If that statement had really been made, if it had been recorded, they were looking at a public relations disaster and a significant lawsuit. But she'd been trained to protect the company and support her employees. Sometimes in stressful situations, words can be misinterpreted or taken out of context, she began, but Marcus cut her off with a gesture. "Ma'am, there's no context that makes discrimination acceptable. There's no interpretation that justifies telling a passenger they should be grateful to fly. Your employees have revealed exactly who they are when they thought no one important was watching." The words "no one important" carried a weight that Patricia couldn't quite interpret, but something in Marcus's tone warned her that she was missing crucial information. Sarah Kim's live stream had reached 25,000 viewers. The hashtag #GateC24 discrimination was trending across multiple platforms. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Civil rights organizations were being tagged in posts faster than they could respond. David Walsh arrived with 2 junior security officers, his radio crackling with updates from Airport Command. As chief of airport security for Terminal 3, he'd been monitoring the developing situation through security cameras and passenger reports. What he'd seen looked like a standard passenger dispute, but the volume of social media activity suggested something bigger was happening. "I understand we have a disruptive passenger," David announced as he approached the gate counter, his hand resting casually near his belt in a gesture designed to project authority. "No disruption," Marcus said calmly, turning to face the security team. "I'm holding a valid boarding pass for a seat I've purchased waiting to board an aircraft I have every right to board. These employees have refused my boarding based solely on my appearance and have made explicitly discriminatory statements." David looked at the crowd of passengers, all holding phones, all recording every word. He'd handled airport disturbances before, but never with this level of scrutiny, never with this many witnesses actively documenting every moment. "Sir, we've received reports of suspicious behavior. I need to see your identification and boarding pass." Marcus handed over both documents without comment. David examined them carefully, comparing the ID photo to the man in front of him, checking the boarding pass details against his handheld scanner. Everything checked out. Legitimate passenger valid ticket, no criminal record, no security flags. But David had learned to trust his officers' judgment, and they were clearly treating this as a legitimate security concern. Sometimes problem passengers appeared calm and reasonable while causing significant disruptions. "Mr. Thompson, your documents appear to be in order, but we've received complaints about your behavior. I'm going to need you to step away from the gate while we sort this out." "What behavior?" Marcus asked. "Please be specific. What have I done that requires security intervention?" David hesitated. He'd watched the security camera footage before arriving, and the passenger hadn't done anything obviously problematic. But airline employees wouldn't call security without good reason. "Attempting to access premium services inappropriately," David replied using language he'd heard in training sessions. "Causing disturbances when questioned by airline staff." Inappropriately, how Marcus pressed. "I have a first-class boarding pass. I've paid for first-class service. What's inappropriate about attempting to board the aircraft I've purchased a ticket for?" The questions were becoming impossible to answer honestly. David found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending actions he couldn't quite justify to a passenger who hadn't actually broken any rules. Jessica stepped forward, frustrated by the passenger's refusal to accept authority. "He's been argumentative and disruptive since the moment he arrived. He's questioning our policies and refusing to accept our judgment." "Questioning policies isn't illegal," Mike Johnson called out from the crowd. "Refusing to accept discrimination isn't disruptive. What you're doing is wrong." Other passengers began voicing agreement. Elena Rodriguez held up her phone showing her Instagram story to anyone who would look. 30,000 people are watching this right now. The whole world can see what you're doing." Tom Bradley stepped forward, his teacher's instincts compelling him to speak truth to authority. "Young man," he said to David, "I've been flying for 40 years. I've never seen anything like this. This gentleman has done absolutely nothing wrong except refuse to be humiliated." The crowd's support was creating a new dynamic. David had expected to face a single difficult passenger, but instead found himself confronting a growing movement of witnesses who clearly supported the man they'd been called to remove. Patricia Williams recognized that the situation was spiraling beyond control. Standard customer service protocols weren't working, and the growing social media attention was turning a simple passenger dispute into a public relations nightmare. "Sir," she said to Marcus, "I apologize if our staff's communication has been unclear. Let me personally escort you to your seat and ensure you're treated with the respect every passenger deserves." It was a reasonable offer, a face-saving compromise that would allow everyone to move forward without further escalation. But Marcus Thompson hadn't endured 25 years of building a business empire to accept half measures and hollow apologies. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone at the gate stop talking, "your employees haven't been unclear. They've been perfectly clear. They've stated explicitly that first class isn't for people like me, that I should be grateful to fly at all, and that I don't meet the standards for premium service." He paused, letting the words settle over the crowd like dust after an explosion. Those statements weren't miscommunications or misunderstandings. They were revelations. They showed exactly who your employees are when they think they can act without consequences. Marcus pulled his phone out again and held it up so everyone could see the screen. His finger hovered over a contact labeled simply corporate. Now I'm going to show you exactly who I am when accountability comes calling. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet after Jessica's discriminatory statements. This was the expectant quiet of an audience waiting for a revelation, the held breath before a secret is revealed. Marcus Thompson was about to change everything at Gate C-24, and everyone present could feel the moment building like electrical charge before lightning strikes. Marcus's finger moved across his phone screen with deliberate precision, each tap echoing in the profound silence that had fallen over Gate C-24. The crowd of passengers pressed closer, their cameras trained on the unfolding drama, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Corporate Marcus said simply as the call connected. His voice carried clearly across the gate area, calm and controlled, but carrying an undertone of authority that made several people unconsciously straighten their shoulders. "This is Marcus. I'm at Gate C-24. Activate Protocol 7. Jessica Martinez felt a flicker of uncertainty for the first time since the confrontation began. Something in the passenger's demeanor had shifted, revealing a core of absolute confidence that she couldn't quite interpret. But she'd committed too far to back down now. "Who are you calling?" she asked with forced bravado. "Your lawyer? Your social media friends?" "This isn't going to change anything." Marcus lowered the phone and looked directly at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm calling my employees." The words hung in the air like a riddle that no one quite understood. Carlos Rivera felt his stomach tighten as various impossible possibilities flickered through his mind, but he pushed them away. This was just a disruptive passenger trying to intimidate them with vague threats. Sir Carlos said making false claims about authority isn't going to help your situation. Marcus reached into his black backpack with movements so deliberate that the entire crowd leaned forward to see what he would produce. His hand emerged holding a leather portfolio, simple and unadorned, but somehow commanding attention through the solemnity with which he handled it. "False claims," Marcus repeated quietly, opening the portfolio with careful precision. "Let me clarify something for everyone present." Inside the portfolio, visible to the growing crowd of passengers and airline employees, was an identification badge, unlike anything they'd seen before. Gold lettering on black background, official corporate seal, executive access designations that required second looks to fully comprehend. Marcus Thompson lifted the badge slowly, holding it so that everyone at Gate C-24 could see clearly, and spoke words that would replay across news networks and social media platforms for weeks to come. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I am the Chief Executive Officer and founder of North Star Airlines." The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Jessica's face went completely white, all color draining from her cheeks as if someone had opened a drain in her bloodstream. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her brain struggling to process information that contradicted everything she thought she understood about the situation. Carlos Rivera staggered backward, his confident posture collapsing like a controlled demolition. His hand reached blindly for the gate counter to steady himself as the full implications of what he'd just heard crashed through his consciousness. Patricia Williams made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper, her professional composure evaporating instantly. She'd been defending her employees against their boss protecting company policy from the company's owner lecturing the founder of the airline about customer service. David Walsh's hand moved away from his belt so quickly it looked like he'd been burned. His radio crackled with urgent updates from airport command supervisors who'd been monitoring the social media explosion and were beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening at Gate C-24. But the passenger's reaction was entirely different. Sarah Kim screamed into her phone, The passenger is the CEO. The passenger is the CEO of the airline. Her live stream viewer count exploded past 50,000 as notifications cascaded across every social media platform. Mike Johnson started laughing, a sound of pure vindication and amazement. I can't believe this just happened. I cannot believe we just watched this happen in real time. Elena Rodriguez was frantically typing updates to her Instagram story, her fingers flying across her phone screen. This is the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. The CEO just revealed himself after his own employees discriminated against him. Tom Bradley shook his head in wonder, his teacher's instincts recognizing a perfect educational moment. "Young lady," he called to Jessica, "you just learned the most expensive lesson of your life." Marcus continued his revelation with methodical precision, producing business cards, corporate documents, and additional identification that removed any possibility of doubt or deception. Each item confirmed what the crowd was struggling to accept. The man who'd been denied first-class service was the billionaire owner of the airline. North Star Airlines. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute power, was founded 25 years ago, with a single mission to ensure that every passenger receives dignity and respect regardless of appearance, background, or perceived status. He paused, letting his employees absorb the full weight of their situation. Today you have revealed exactly how far we've strayed from that mission. You have demonstrated precisely the kind of discrimination this airline was created to eliminate. Patricia Williams found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Thompson, sir, I had no idea." If you'd known what Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp for the first time since the confrontation began. "If you'd known I was wealthy. If you'd known I had power. If you'd known I could fire you." The questions hit like hammer blows because they exposed the ugly truth underlying everything that had happened. The airline employees hadn't been following policy or protecting standards. They'd been discriminating based on appearance, and they only regretted it now because they'd chosen the wrong target. The point, Marcus continued, is that you shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity. You shouldn't need to see wealth or status markers to provide respectful service. You shouldn't need to fear consequences to do what's right. Jessica finally found her voice, though it shook with desperation. "Sir, I apologize. I didn't mean... I was just following what Marcus asked. Which company policy instructs you to tell passengers they should be grateful to fly? Which training manual teaches you that first class isn't for people like anyone? Which procedure guide authorizes discrimination based on clothing?" The questions were unanswerable because no such policies existed. What had happened at Gate C-24 wasn't the result of corporate training or official procedures. It was the result of personal prejudice given free rein under the assumption that no one important would ever hold them accountable. Marcus's phone buzzed with incoming calls and messages as news of the confrontation spread across social media and reached North Star's corporate headquarters. But he ignored the notifications, focusing entirely on the moment at hand. "Carlos Rivera," he said, his voice carrying the formal tone of corporate authority. "You are terminated effective immediately." The words hit Carlos like a physical blow. 8 years with the company, 6 years as a supervisor, countless positive performance reviews, all erased in a single moment of poor judgment. Jessica Martinez. Marcus continued, "You are terminated effective immediately." Jessica's legs gave out and she gripped the gate counter to keep from falling. Her career in aviation was over. Her reputation destroyed, her discriminatory statements now preserved forever in viral videos watched by hundreds of thousands of people. "Patricia Williams," Marcus said, turning to face the regional manager who'd tried to defend the indefensible. "You are terminated effective immediately. 3 careers ended with clinical precision. each termination witnessed by a crowd of passengers and broadcast live to a global audience that was growing exponentially as the story spread across news networks and social media platforms. David Walsh stepped forward, carefully recognizing that he was walking through a minefield of potential career destruction. "Mr. Thompson, sir, I apologize for any misunderstanding. We were responding to reports from airline personnel." "And you failed to conduct an independent assessment," Marcus replied. "You took discriminatory allegations at face value without examining whether any actual disruption or security threat existed. You participated in harassment of a passenger based solely on airline employees' biases." David's badge and security credentials were worthless now. His entire career at O'Hare was ending because he'd chosen to trust discrimination over investigation. The crowd of passengers erupted in cheers and applause. Justice was being served in real-time accountability delivered with surgical precision. Social media exploded with celebration as people shared and reshared videos of the most satisfying corporate justice story in aviation history. But Marcus Thompson wasn't finished. To every passenger who witnessed this discrimination, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the gate area, "Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for recording what happened. Thank you for refusing to let injustice pass unnoticed." He turned to address the cameras that were capturing every word. "This is exactly why North Star Airlines exists. This is exactly what we were created to prevent. And this is exactly why accountability must be public, immediate, and absolute." Marcus's phone rang with calls from news networks, corporate executives, and civil rights organizations, but he let them go to voicemail. This moment belonged to the witnesses, the passengers who'd refused to stay silent when they saw discrimination happening in front of them. "Your voices mattered," he told the crowd. "Your cameras mattered. Your refusal to accept injustice mattered. You didn't just witness history today. You participated in creating it." The applause that followed was different from typical crowd reactions. It carried the weight of vindication, the satisfaction of seeing power used responsibly, the hope that comes from watching someone with authority choose justice over convenience. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus turned back to the gate counter, picked up his boarding pass, and spoke the words that would close this chapter of aviation history. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a flight to catch. And I have an airline to fix." The termination of 3 airline employees in front of a viral audience was just the opening act. As word of Marcus Thompson's revelation spread beyond Gate C-24, the consequences began cascading through North Star Airlines with the speed and force of an avalanche. Marcus's phone erupted with incoming calls, each ringtone adding to the cacophony of passenger chatter, news notifications, and social media alerts. The first call came from Amanda Foster, North Star's chief operating officer, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Marcus, what the hell is happening at O'Hare? Social media is exploding. Our stock price just jumped 15%, then dropped 8%, then shot up 20%. The board is freaking out, and I've got 47 reporters calling for immediate statements." Marcus calmly answered the call while walking toward his gate, surrounded by passengers who were still processing what they'd witnessed. "Amanda, prepare immediate termination paperwork for Carlos Rivera, Jessica Martinez, and Patricia Williams. Effective immediately. No severance, no company recommendations. And prepare a comprehensive press statement." "Marcus, shouldn't we investigate first? Get their side of the story. Legal wants to review." "Their side of the story was broadcast live to 60,000 people. Marcus interrupted. "I was there. I heard every word. The investigation is complete." In North Star's Chicago headquarters, alarms were literally ringing. The company's social media monitoring systems had detected an unprecedented surge in brand mentions, hashtag usage, and viral video shares. The artificial intelligence that tracked corporate reputation had classified the situation as a Class 5 crisis event, the highest level in the system. Miguel Santos, head of human resources, was simultaneously fielding calls from legal counsel, public relations, and executive leadership while trying to access personnel files for the terminated employees. His computer screen filled with emergency protocols he'd hoped never to use. "Get me everything on Rivera, Martinez, and Williams," he told his assistant while speed dialing Marcus's direct line. Employment history, previous complaints, training records, performance evaluations. Everything. And get legal review on immediate termination procedures. The terminated employees themselves were experiencing their own versions of chaos. Jessica Martinez sat in an airport security office. Her corporate badge confiscated her airline credentials, revoked her phone buzzing with calls from reporters who'd somehow obtained her contact information. The videos of her discriminatory statements were spreading faster than she could track them. "I don't understand how this happened," she kept repeating to the security officer processing her expulsion from the premises. "He looked like... he was dressed like... How was I supposed to know Carlos Rivera was experiencing his own nightmare in a different security office? 6 years as a supervisor gone in an instant. His LinkedIn profile was already flooded with comments from people who'd seen the viral videos. Future employment prospects in aviation were evaporating in real time. Patricia Williams had the furthest to fall. As regional manager, she'd been responsible for training, policy implementation, and corporate culture. Her failure to recognize and correct the discrimination made her complicit in ways that would haunt her far beyond the immediate termination. Back at Gate C-24, the crowd dynamics had shifted completely. What had started as routine boarding delays had become a celebration of justice delivered in real time. Passengers were sharing contact information, connecting on social media, forming bonds forged by their shared witness to history. Sarah Kim's live stream had peaked at over 100,000 concurrent viewers before technical limitations forced her to split across multiple platforms. Her phone battery was dying, but she couldn't stop documenting the aftermath. "You guys, I'm still shaking," she told her audience. "I've been creating content for 5 years and I've never seen anything like this." The CEO of a major airline just revealed himself after being discriminated against by his own employees. This is going in textbooks. Mike Johnson was fielding interview requests from news networks while trying to process his own role in the events. As a frequent business traveler, he'd witnessed discrimination before, but had rarely spoken up. Today felt different. "I keep thinking about all the times I stayed quiet when I saw something wrong," he told Elena Rodriguez as they exchanged contact information. "Today changed something in me. I can't just be a passive witness anymore." Elena was managing her own social media explosion. Her Instagram stories had been shared thousands of times, her posts gaining viral traction across multiple platforms. But more importantly, her 6-year-old daughter had witnessed an extraordinary lesson in standing up for what's right. "Mija," she said to her daughter, "remember what you saw today. Remember that when powerful people do wrong things, other people can hold them accountable. Remember that your phone, your voice, your witness matters." Tom Bradley, the retired teacher, was already planning how to incorporate this experience into the social justice workshops he volunteered for at community centers. 67 years old, he mused, and I'm still learning lessons about courage and accountability. The immediate financial implications were staggering. North Star's stock price was experiencing historic volatility as markets struggled to process the implications of the viral incident. Initial panic selling gave way to massive buying as investors recognized the positive publicity potential of a CEO who fired discriminatory employees in real time. Trading volume exceeded normal levels by 400%. Financial news networks scrambled to provide context for the unprecedented market response to a customer service incident. Analysis ranged from celebration of corporate accountability to concerns about viral justice and due process. Amanda Foster was trying to manage 17 different crisis protocols simultaneously while watching Marcus board his flight as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Sir," she said into her phone, "we need you back in Chicago immediately. The FAA is asking questions. The NAACP wants a meeting. Congress is requesting statements, and we have 47 news crews outside headquarters. Handle the FAA and Congress." Marcus replied calmly, settling into seat 1A. "Schedule the NAACP meeting for next week. And tell the news crews they'll have a comprehensive statement within 3 hours." "What about the board? They're demanding an emergency meeting. The board can wait. I have a flight to catch and an airline to fix." In North Star's legal department, attorneys were working overtime to ensure that the immediate terminations were bulletproof from a legal standpoint. The viral nature of the incident made standard review processes impossible, but the clear evidence of discriminatory behavior caught on camera simplified what could have been complex employment law questions. We're clean, reported Chief Legal Counsel Robert Kim. Discrimination clearly documented, multiple witnesses live streaming evidence. The terminated employees have no legal recourse. If anything, we could be liable if we hadn't taken immediate action. The social media explosion was unprecedented in aviation history. GateC24 Justice became the #1 trending hashtag globally. North Star accountability reached over 2 million mentions in the first hour. Celebrity endorsements began pouring in as public figures shared the videos and praised Marcus's leadership. Airport security was dealing with its own crisis. The incident had exposed serious flaws in their response protocols, revealing how discriminatory reports from airline employees could trigger inappropriate security responses. Chief of Security David Walsh's career was effectively over. His reputation destroyed by viral videos showing him threatening a passenger based on discriminatory complaints. "We need comprehensive retraining for all security personnel," announced Assistant Security Chief Maria Gonzalez, who was inheriting responsibility for the terminal. This incident revealed gaps in our assessment procedures that could have led to much worse outcomes. The technology implications were fascinating to data analysts tracking the viral spread. The incident demonstrated the power of real-time social media documentation to create immediate accountability. Multiple camera angles, live streaming, and instant sharing had created an unprecedented transparency that made denial or spin impossible. "This is the new reality," observed Dr. Jennifer Liu, a professor of digital media at Northwestern University. "When justice happens in real time, broadcast live to global audiences, it creates accountability mechanisms that didn't exist even 5 years ago. The ability to hide discriminatory behavior behind corporate policies and legal delays is disappearing. Customer service departments across the aviation industry were scrambling to review their own policies and training procedures. The North Star incident had created a new standard for corporate accountability that competitors couldn't ignore. American Airlines announced emergency sensitivity training for all customer-facing employees. Delta instituted real-time social media monitoring for discrimination incidents. Southwest created an immediate response protocol for viral customer service events. Every airline in America is reviewing their procedures tonight, noted aviation industry analyst Thomas Chen. This incident changed the standards for what customers will accept and what social media will tolerate. The personal stories of passengers who'd witnessed the discrimination were beginning to emerge in interviews and social media posts. Many described feeling empowered by the experience, inspired by seeing accountability delivered so clearly and immediately. "I've been discriminated against before," posted one passenger on Twitter. "Usually nothing happens. Complaints disappear into corporate bureaucracy. Today, I watched justice happen in real time. I watched someone with power use it responsibly. It gives me hope." But perhaps the most significant immediate consequence was happening on Marcus Thompson's flight to Atlanta. As he settled into his first-class seat surrounded by passengers who now knew exactly who he was, a different conversation began. Mr. Thompson said the passenger in 1B, a young black woman who'd been watching the gate incident unfold. Thank you. Not just for today, but for building something that represents us, for creating a space where dignity matters. Similar comments came from passengers throughout the cabin. Recognition that they'd witnessed more than corporate discipline. They'd seen the values that built North Star Airlines demonstrated in real time by the person who'd created them. As Flight 882 finally taxied toward the runway, Marcus Thompson looked out at the storm clouds that had delayed their departure and reflected on the lightning that had struck at Gate C-24. Sometimes justice arrived unexpectedly, triggered by ordinary moments that revealed extraordinary truths about character, power, and responsibility. The real work of fixing North Star Airlines was just beginning. But today, at Gate C-24, something important had been restored: the principle that dignity and respect weren't privileges to be earned through wealth or status. They were rights to be protected even when protecting them required the most powerful person in the room to reveal exactly who they were. The Boeing 737 reached cruising altitude over Indiana as Marcus Thompson began the most important work of his career, rebuilding the airline he'd created to prevent exactly what had happened at Gate C-24. His laptop opened to reveal a comprehensive action plan that had been developing in his mind throughout the confrontation, each discriminatory comment adding urgency to reforms he'd been considering for months. The transformation of North Star Airlines began with a single email sent from 35,000 feet addressed to every employee in the company. Today, I witnessed discrimination at its most basic level on our airline. 3 employees were terminated immediately because they violated the core values that define who we are as a company. Effective tomorrow, we are implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history. This is not optional. This is who we must be. The email included a link to the viral videos from Gate C-24, ensuring that every North Star employee would see exactly what behavior was unacceptable and understand precisely why the terminated employees had lost their careers in an instant. In Chicago, Amanda Foster was coordinating the most complex corporate response in North Star's history. Conference rooms filled with executives, lawyers, public relations specialists, and human resources directors working through the night to implement Marcus's vision of complete cultural transformation. We have 48 hours to announce concrete changes, Amanda announced to the assembled teams. Not promises or reviews or committees. Actual, measurable, immediate changes that demonstrate our commitment to preventing future discrimination. The first change was technological. North Star's IT department worked overnight to develop the Dignity Protocol mobile application, a real-time discrimination reporting app that would allow passengers and employees to document incidents immediately and route them directly to executive leadership. Every report triggers automatic investigation, explained Chief Technology Officer David Park. No bureaucratic delays, no departmental filtering, no opportunities for incidents to disappear into administrative processes. Real-time accountability for real-time discrimination. The app included features that the terminated employees at Gate C-24 would have found terrifying: automatic recording capabilities, instant social media integration, and direct connection to corporate executives who could authorize immediate corrective action. Miguel Santos was redesigning North Star's entire training program around the lessons learned from the Gate C-24 incident. We're not adding sensitivity training to existing programs, he announced to his staff. We're rebuilding everything around dignity and respect as core operational requirements. The new training wasn't theoretical or abstract. It used the actual videos from Gate C-24 as case studies, showing employees exactly what discrimination looked like and precisely what consequences they could expect if they made similar choices. Every employee will watch Marcus Thompson being discriminated against by North Star employees, Miguel explained to the training development team. They'll see the viral videos, read the social media responses, and understand exactly how quickly careers can end when discrimination is exposed. Legal counsel Robert Kim was drafting the most aggressive anti-discrimination policy in corporate America. The new standards went far beyond legal compliance, establishing zero tolerance for biased behavior and creating accountability measures that would make discrimination professionally suicidal. One verified incident of discrimination results in immediate termination, Robert announced to the legal team. No warnings, no performance improvement plans, no second chances. We're removing the financial incentive to risk discriminatory behavior. The policy included provisions that the Gate C-24 employees would have found sobering automatic industry blacklisting for terminated discriminators, public disclosure of termination reasons, and civil liability for reputation damage to the company. But Marcus's most revolutionary innovation was the creation of the Passenger Advocate Program, an independent oversight network that would monitor airline operations for discriminatory patterns and provide immediate intervention when bias was detected. The passengers at Gate C-24 saved us from ourselves, Marcus explained in a video message to the implementation teams. They spoke up when our employees failed. They recorded evidence when our training failed. They demanded accountability when our supervision failed. We're building on their courage. The Advocate Program hired former civil rights activists, discrimination attorneys, and community leaders to serve as independent monitors with authority to investigate complaints, override employee decisions, and recommend immediate corrective action. This isn't customer service, explained newly hired Advocate Director Dr. Angela Washington, a former NAACP legal counsel. This is civil rights enforcement at the corporate level. We're creating accountability structures that make discrimination impossible to hide and expensive to attempt. The program included rapid response teams stationed at major airports, equipped with authority to override gate agent decisions, investigate discrimination complaints in real time, and provide immediate remediation for affected passengers. Financial implications of the transformation were staggering. North Star allocated $50 million for immediate implementation of anti-discrimination programs, technology development, and employee retraining. Wall Street analysts struggled to assess whether the investment represented visionary leadership or expensive overreaction. This is either the smartest reputation management in aviation history or the most expensive response to a single customer service incident, noted financial analyst Sarah Chen. But given the viral nature of discrimination incidents in the social media age, it might be the only viable strategy. The investment paid immediate dividends in customer loyalty and employee morale. Social media sentiment toward North Star shifted dramatically as passengers shared stories of improved treatment and employees reported feeling empowered to provide dignified service without fearing administrative backlash. Industry-wide implications emerged quickly as competitors scrambled to match North Star's new standards. American Airlines announced its own discrimination response protocol within 72 hours. Delta implemented real-time bias training for all customer-facing employees. Southwest created passenger advocacy positions modeled on Marcus's program. The entire industry is being forced to evolve, observed aviation reporter Jennifer Martinez. The Gate C-24 incident created new customer expectations that airlines can't ignore. Discrimination that might have been handled quietly in the past now carries viral reputation risks that threaten company survival. The Federal Aviation Administration took notice of North Star's voluntary implementation of anti-discrimination measures that exceeded federal requirements. Transportation Secretary Maria Rodriguez announced that the federal government was studying North Star's programs as potential models for industry-wide regulation. Private sector innovation in civil rights enforcement deserves federal attention, Secretary Rodriguez announced. If voluntary corporate programs can prevent discrimination more effectively than government regulations, we need to understand how to scale these approaches across all transportation industries. Congressional interest followed quickly. Representative James Thompson announced hearings on discrimination in transportation with North Star's transformation, serving as a case study in effective corporate accountability. The speed and comprehensiveness of North Star's response demonstrates what's possible when corporate leadership prioritizes civil rights over profit protection, Representative Thompson noted. We're examining whether federal law should require similar accountability measures across the transportation sector. The technology Marcus had implemented at North Star began attracting attention from other industries facing similar discrimination challenges. Hotel chains, restaurant companies, and retail corporations inquired about licensing the Dignity Protocol app for their own customer service operations. Discrimination costs money in the social media age, explained Dr. Michael Roberts, a business ethics professor at Harvard. Companies that can prevent viral discrimination incidents have significant competitive advantages over those that handle discrimination reactively. 6 months after the Gate C-24 incident, North Star's transformation was generating measurable results. Discrimination complaints dropped to 0 across all operations. Customer satisfaction scores reached historic highs. Employee retention improved as workers reported feeling supported in providing dignified service. More importantly, the culture change was becoming self-sustaining. Employees were policing each other's behavior, intervening when they observed potential bias, and creating accountability structures that didn't depend on management oversight. "We don't just train against discrimination anymore," reported newly promoted Chicago operations manager Lisa Park. "We train for dignity. Every employee interaction is evaluated based on whether it demonstrates respect for passenger humanity." It's become automatic. The long-term implications extended beyond North Star to influence corporate culture across multiple industries. Business schools began teaching the Gate C-24 incident as a case study in crisis transformation and values-based leadership. Marcus Thompson didn't just fire 3 employees, noted Professor Elizabeth Chen of Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. He used a moment of corporate crisis to demonstrate that company values can be more than marketing language. He showed that accountability can be immediate and absolute when principles are clear and leadership is committed. The personal stories of transformation were equally compelling. Sarah Kim had parlayed her viral documentation into a career as a civil rights advocate, using her social media platform to highlight discrimination across industries. Mike Johnson had become a corporate trainer, teaching business travelers how to intervene effectively when they witnessed discrimination. Elena Rodriguez had founded a nonprofit organization focused on teaching children to recognize and respond to discrimination, using her daughter's experience at Gate C-24 as inspiration for age-appropriate civil rights education. "My daughter learned that regular people can make a difference when they speak up for what's right," Elena explained. "She saw that justice can happen when witnesses refuse to stay silent. That's a lesson I want every child to understand." Tom Bradley had returned to teaching, incorporating the Gate C-24 experience into curricula about civil rights, corporate responsibility, and individual courage in the face of institutional bias. 67 years old, and I learned something new about standing up for justice, Tom reflected. It's never too late to find your voice, never too late to hold power accountable. But perhaps the most significant transformation occurred in Marcus Thompson himself. The experience of facing discrimination on his own airline had reinforced his understanding that wealth and power created obligations to protect others who lacked similar resources. "I built this airline so no one would experience what I experienced at 22, Marcus reflected in a year-end interview. The Gate C-24 incident reminded me that building something isn't enough. You have to actively maintain the values that created it, actively protect the principles that define it. The North Star Foundation, launched 6 months after the incident, provided scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing aviation careers, funded civil rights training for transportation workers, and supported community programs focused on dignity and respect across cultural differences. Justice isn't just about punishment, Marcus explained at the Foundation's launch event. It's about creating structures that prevent future harm. It's about building networks that protect dignity proactively, rather than reactively. As North Star Airlines entered its second quarter of post-transformation operations, the company had become more than a transportation business. It had evolved into a demonstration of how corporate power could be wielded responsibly, how business success could align with social justice, and how individual courage could create institutional change. The empty seats at Gate C-24, where Jessica Martinez, Carlos Rivera, and Patricia Williams once worked, had been filled by employees trained in the new standards, equipped with new tools, and committed to new principles. But more importantly, those seats were now surrounded by accountability structures that would prevent future discrimination and ensure that dignity remained North Star's defining characteristic. The transformation was complete, but the work was ongoing. Every flight, every interaction, every moment of contact between North Star employees and passengers represented an opportunity to demonstrate that respect and dignity were not negotiable values regardless of passenger appearance, background, or perceived status. 1 year after Gate C-24, Marcus Thompson stood in the same terminal where his employees had tried to deny him the dignity he'd spent a lifetime earning. But this time he wasn't traveling incognito. He was there for the dedication of the Gate C-24 Memorial Display, a permanent installation celebrating the passengers who'd refused to let discrimination pass unnoticed. The memorial featured photos of Sarah Kim Mike Johnson, Elena Rodriguez, Tom Bradley, and the other witnesses who'd used their phones, their voices, and their courage to document injustice and demand accountability. Below their images, a simple plaque read, "When ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary wrongs, justice becomes inevitable." Marcus had insisted that his own image not be included. "This memorial isn't about me," he'd explained to the design committee. "It's about the passengers who spoke up before they knew who I was, who defended a stranger's dignity without expecting any reward. They're the heroes of this story." Standing before the memorial, Marcus felt the weight of the journey that had brought him from humiliation to vindication to transformation. The 22-year-old man who'd been denied first-class service 3 decades earlier could never have imagined that his pain would ultimately create change for millions of travelers. His phone buzzed with a text message from his mother in Detroit. "Watching your interview on CNN. Your father would be proud. You didn't just build a business, baby. You built justice." The interview she referenced had aired that morning, marking the anniversary of the Gate C-24 incident. Marcus had used the platform not to relitigate the confrontation, but to share the deeper lessons learned from a moment when corporate values faced real-world testing. "I didn't set out to become a symbol," he'd told the interviewer. "I set out to catch a flight. But sometimes ordinary moments become extraordinary opportunities to demonstrate who we really are when our principles are challenged." The transformation of North Star Airlines had exceeded every expectation. 0 discrimination complaints in 12 months. Customer satisfaction at historic highs. Employee morale improved across all metrics. But more importantly, the company had become a model for how businesses could align profit with principles, success with social responsibility. Sarah Kim approached Marcus at the memorial ceremony, her phone conspicuously absent for once. Over the past year, she'd evolved from accidental viral documentarian to intentional civil rights advocate, using her platform to highlight discrimination across industries while teaching others how to be effective witnesses to injustice. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I wanted to thank you again, not just for what you did that day, but for what you built afterward. You turned our anger into action, our outrage into lasting change." Marcus shook his head gently. "You turned your witness into courage, Sarah. I just provided consequences." The courage came from passengers who refused to let wrong pass for right. Mike Johnson had traveled from Denver for the ceremony, bringing with him a letter signed by 67 business travelers who'd witnessed discrimination on various airlines over the past year and intervened because they'd been inspired by the Gate C-24 example. "You started something that day," Mike told Marcus. "People are finding their voices. Passengers are speaking up. We're not just witnesses anymore. We're participants in creating the change we want to see." Elena Rodriguez attended with her daughter, now 8 years old and uncommonly articulate about civil rights and personal responsibility. The child had become something of a local celebrity in her community, speaking at school assemblies about the importance of standing up for others. "Mr. Marcus," the little girl said with the serious tone children use for important conversations, "my mom says you fired the mean people because they were wrong about dignity." "Is dignity something everyone gets?" Marcus knelt to her eye level, understanding that this conversation might be the most important one of his day. "Everyone gets dignity, sweetheart. It's not something people earn or lose based on how they look or what they wear. It's something everyone carries inside them, and it's our job to protect it for each other." Tom Bradley had driven up from Phoenix, bringing with him a group of former students who'd asked to meet the man who'd demonstrated that standing up for principles could change entire industries. At 68, Tom had become a sought-after speaker on civil rights and corporate responsibility, using the Gate C-24 story to illustrate how individual courage could create collective change. "You know what I've learned this past year?" Tom asked Marcus as they stood before the memorial. "Age doesn't matter when it comes to finding your voice. 70 years old, and I'm still learning how to be brave." The financial impact of North Star's transformation continued to exceed projections. The company's stock price had increased 200% over the year, driven not just by improved operations but by customer loyalty and employee engagement that competitors couldn't match. Industry analysts had coined the term dignity dividend to describe the financial benefits of treating people with respect. North Star proved that doing right and doing well aren't mutually exclusive. Noted business ethics professor Dr. Angela Martinez. They created a competitive advantage through moral leadership, customer loyalty through consistent values, and employee engagement through meaningful purpose. But the most significant impact extended far beyond business metrics. The Gate C-24 incident had influenced federal legislation, corporate training programs, and social media activism across multiple industries. The North Star Standard had become shorthand for immediate accountability and values-based leadership. Representative Thompson's congressional hearings had resulted in the Transportation Dignity Act requiring airlines to implement anti-discrimination training and establishing federal oversight of bias complaints. The legislation passed with bipartisan support sponsored by lawmakers who'd been moved by the viral videos and impressed by North Star's voluntary transformation. "When corporate leadership demonstrates what's possible," Representative Thompson noted during the bill signing ceremony, "government has an obligation to ensure those standards become universal expectations." As the memorial ceremony concluded, Marcus found himself in conversation with Dr. Angela Washington, the former NAACP attorney who'd become North Star's first passenger advocate director. Her program had processed over 300 potential discrimination incidents in its first year, resolving most through immediate intervention and creating data that helped identify and address bias patterns before they escalated. The beauty of the advocate network, Dr. Washington explained, is that it makes discrimination impossible to hide and expensive to attempt. When employees know that every interaction is monitored, when passengers know they have immediate recourse bias, becomes professionally suicidal. The ripple effects continued expanding. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, and healthcare networks had implemented variations of the dignity protocol, creating accountability structures that prioritized respect over convenience and values over profits. Marcus Thompson accidentally created a civil rights enforcement model that's scalable across industries, observed Dr. Jennifer Liu of Northwestern University. He proved that technology, transparency, and immediate consequences could prevent discrimination more effectively than traditional complaint processes. As evening fell over, O'Hare Marcus made one final stop before departing. Gate C-24 had been reconfigured and redesigned, but the essential geography remained the same. The counter where Jessica Martinez had questioned his dignity, the space where Carlos Rivera had suggested fraud, the spot where Patricia Williams had defended the indefensible. But now the gate was staffed by employees trained in the new standards, equipped with new tools, and committed to new principles. A small placard near the boarding podium read, "Every passenger deserves dignity, respect, and courtesy, regardless of appearance, background, or perceived status. This is not optional. This is who we are." Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Amanda Foster. "Sir, your flight to San Francisco is boarding, first class seat 1A. He smiled at the irony. 1 year later, he was back in first class, back in seat 1A, back on a North Star flight. But everything had changed. The seat that had once been denied him was now surrounded by networks designed to ensure that no passenger would ever face the discrimination he'd experienced. As Flight 891 lifted off from Chicago, Marcus Thompson looked down at the terminal where his employees had learned that wealth and power create obligations to protect others who lack similar resources. The lights of Gate C-24 grew smaller below, but the principles established there continued expanding across industries, communities, and individual consciences. The flight attendant approached with the quiet professionalism that had become North Star's trademark. "Mr. Thompson, is there anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable?" Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing plans for the North Star Foundation's expansion into international civil rights training programs. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Treat every passenger like they matter. That's all any of us really need." As the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from humiliation to vindication to transformation. The 22-year-old man who'd been told he didn't belong in first class had built an airline that redefined what first class could mean, not a place reserved for wealth or status, but a standard of dignity available to everyone. His legacy wouldn't be measured in billions earned or planes operated or routes flown. It would be measured in moments when passengers received respect they might have been denied, when employees chose dignity over discrimination, when ordinary people found extraordinary courage to speak truth to power. The Gate C-24 incident had lasted 20 minutes, but it had created changes that would outlast any individual career or corporate structure. Because sometimes, justice arrives unexpectedly, triggered by ordinary moments that reveal extraordinary truths about character, power, and the responsibility we all share to protect each other's dignity. And sometimes when someone with power chooses to use it responsibly, 20 minutes can change the world. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power we all have to stand up for what's right, then we need your help to spread this message. Hit that like button right now to show your support for dignity and justice. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell, because we bring you stories of courage and accountability that the world needs to hear. Share this video with someone who needs to see that change is possible, that ordinary people can create extraordinary impact when they refuse to stay silent. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when you spoke up for someone else, or when someone spoke up for you. Your voice matters. Your witness counts, and your story could inspire the next person to find their courage. And remember, dignity isn't something you earn through wealth or status. It's something you protect for each other every single day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of a community that believes everyone deserves respect. We'll see you in the next story, where ordinary courage creates extraordinary change.